A special welcome to Rabbi Arthur Bielfeld, who is a longtime friend of the Balderton family. I understand that Sam is wearing the talit that his father wore on his bar mitzvah day in your congregation, Temple Emmanuel. Sam is a fifth-generation Holy Blossomite. We call those deep roots. Your grandfather is one of the keepers of our history, 160 years strong. That's right. There's a stained glass window here dedicated by the Helen family. And so that means, Sam, you are an inheritor of a lot of things to remember. And we take the responsibility of remembering very seriously, not only as congregants and leaders of Holy Blossom Temple, but as Jews. And it seems that in the last 2 weeks, there are so many occasions from the last 100 years that we are instructed to remember. And I'd like to touch on those on this Remembrance Day. This Shabbat, we read from Parshat Chayei Sarah when our matriarch Sarah is laid to rest at the beginning of the portion, and our patriarch Abraham is laid to rest at the end of the Torah portion, both in the cave of Machpelah, and their sons gather to remember them, to stand at their burial ground and remember them. We are taught that remembrance is the key to redemption. The Baal Shem Tov, the 18th century founder of Hasidism, taught remembrance is the key to redemption. And so we are commanded actually 169 times in the Hebrew Bible. Zachor, remember, remember, remember. Rabbi Reuven Bulka of Ottawa, the honorary chaplain of the Dominion Command of the Royal Canadian Legion, reflects on the mitzvah of remembering this day. He says, the act of remembrance is imperative to express unrelenting thanks to our heroic veterans. As the troops fought and fight for freedom, ours is the supreme responsibility to give meaning to that freedom by embracing the language of respect, the language of inclusion, the language of harmony, to thereby build gentle, caring communities wherein everyone feels welcome, at home, and appreciated. That is the Canadian way. We love our veterans, Rabbi Bulka says, and we love the freedom that we enjoy thanks to them. We remember with everlasting gratitude by giving meaning and substance to that freedom. Let us together soldier on toward that goal, and may God bless our sacred partnership. Amen. This Remembrance Day, also known as Armistice Day, recalls the date and the time when the World War I armies held their fire. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, some 99 years ago. We stood for 2 minutes at 11 o'clock to remember those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. And at the conclusion of our service, we will rise again before the Mourner's Kaddish to hear the names of 23 young men from our congregation who lost their lives during the 2 world wars. You know the famous 1915 poem in Flanders Fields, there is that phrase, between the crosses. Among those who lie between the crosses are the Jewish soldiers of the Canadian Armed Forces. According to the Jewish War Veterans of Canada, Jews have served in the wars fought by Canadians both before and after Confederation. 4,000 Canadian Jews enlisted in the various armed branches of the Canadian Forces in World War I. Over 100 were killed. Many received wounds, and 84 were decorated for bravery. It is neither commonly known nor fully appreciated that during the Second World War, out of a total population of Jewish Canadians numbering 167,000 men, women, and children, over 18,000 served in one or more of the branches of the Canadian Armed Forces. And of that number, 423 sacrificed their lives. This is no doubt the greatest per capita contribution of any ethnic or religious group in Canada during that war. So allow me to share two stories. One was a soldier from World War I, and one from World War II. These stories have both recently come to light in the Canadian press the last 2 weeks. These men were not any more heroic than any of the others of the thousands who served, but these two were ours. These two men, Meyer Cohen and Marvin Warsh, were members of Holy Blossom Temple. Let their stories stand for the many more. And I should say we're particularly graced by you, Henry Sherman. Thank you for standing tall on this bima as we stand with you on this Remembrance Day. We're really honored by your presence. So this year is the 100th yahrzeit of a young man of our congregation who fell in the 1917 Battle of Passchendaele. His name was Meyer Cohen. He was the uncle of our past president, Meyer Brody, of blessed memory. I assume that our Meyer was named for that earlier Meyer, his uncle. Meyer Cohen's story was retold just yesterday on CBC Radio with Matt Galloway. What do we know of him? He was born in Toronto, the third of 5 children, to Moses Mark Cohen from New York and Anna Gosler from Germany. Cohen attended Holy Blossom Temple on Bond Street then, and he stood there on his bar mitzvah day on that bima. He was a graduate of Harvard Collegiate, which just recently learned to add his name to their war memorial. He was 20 years old when he attested for overseas service, and we know that on the form that he filled out, when it asked for occupation, he answered, gentleman. He was but one of the 3,042 Canadian soldiers who died in the Second Battle of Passchendaele in 1917. 4 years ago, the Montreal Gazette tells this of his story. Lieutenant Meyer Cohen died at the age of 22. He served as a lieutenant with the Montreal-based Black Watch, then known as the Royal Highlanders of Canada, the 42nd Battalion. The regiment was strongly identified with links to Scotland and the Presbyterian faith. But from all accounts, Cohen, a Jew, fit in admirably, though he wore his kilt sloppily. They called him McCohen. The brigade commander, Archibald MacDonald, said, "I can never let you call yourself McCohen unless you learn to wear your kilt properly." And so he did. On the night of September 29, 1917, Cohen led a patrol into no man's land in northern France. They surprised the Germans, killing 3, capturing 3 more, and then another 3 more. Cohen brought back the prisoners and all of his men without one casualty. Then, during the night of November 2nd, leading into the 3rd, he led a party to probe the German defense at Passchendaele, known as Graf House. When dawn broke, Cohen was found among the dead. The war diary records his body was found on the highest point of the ruins of the Graf House. He had been shot in a number of places and had apparently fallen in attempting to organize the remnants of his party for the defense of the position that he had captured. Rabbi Solomon Jacobs of Holy Blossom Temple remembered Meyer Cohen in his sermon, saying, "Meyer was born and bred in this congregation. It was within these walls, then on Bond Street. It was within these walls he was accustomed to worship since his childhood, and we remember him well. The bright, winsome lad, merry in disposition, anxious to fight the battle of life and win for himself a good name." Cohen was posthumously awarded many awards. And then comes the capstone to this story. It's noteworthy that 4 years later, November 13th, 1921, the Black Watch paraded through the streets of Montreal to the Church of St. Andrew and St. Paul on Dorchester Street, where the Fairmount Queen Elizabeth Hotel then later stood. This was the regimental church of the Black Watch, Scottish, Presbyterian. A stained glass window was dedicated in memory of the men of the 42nd Battalion who had died in the Great War. The window is dominated by a figure of Jesus, as to be expected, but unexpectedly, on one side of Jesus, there is a small image of the biblical young David holding the head of Goliath. And just above David's right shoulder, in this church, is a small six-pointed Star of David. Colonel Paul Hutchison wrote about the regiment, "It was realized that without some special symbol, a Christian memorial could hardly be considered as perpetuating the memory of such a member of the Jewish faith as the gallant young Lieutenant Cohen." It is said that the Queen Mother visited that church in 1962, and she noticed little David, and she noticed the little Star of David, and she asked about that window and was told of Meyer Cohen. May his memory be for a blessing. You'll hear before we stand for Kaddish that on the Shloshim list of those who died in recent weeks, there is among them the name of our congregant Marvin Walsh, who died just last week. He served in the Royal Air Force, flying until the end of the Second World War, earning many medals. Marvin experienced many close calls during his service. One story he liked to tell about near misses. He drank from a batch of bad beer, and so he couldn't fly the next day. He says that beer saved his life, for the crew he was supposed to fly with were all killed in action that day. Marvin didn't see all that much combat, but on one occasion his plane came under gunfire, and when he landed safely, got out of his plane, removed the metal helmet from under his seat, he saw that it was dented by a bullet. His grandson Matthew said, "We had to pull these stories out of my grandfather." Last week, Marvin was laid to rest at the Holy Blossom Cemetery on Brimley Road. Rabbi Helfman was there to honor him and was eyewitness to a remarkable story retold in this week's Star. You see, just before Marvin Warsh's funeral began, a Lancaster bomber warplane flew overhead. By sheer coincidence, Marvin, who lived until the ripe age of 97, was a Lancaster bomber navigator in the Second World War. There are only 2 of these planes left to fly today. It was not originally intended to fly over our Jewish cemetery last week. Its pilot, Dave Rohr, president of the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, was planning to take members of the museum on a flight over Niagara Falls. But due to poor weather, the plane left late and had to take another route, flying right over Brimley Road. The pilot, Rohr, said, "We tell these stories of our veterans. We tell of duty, of service, and sacrifice. It was quite an honor to be there at the right place at the right time. It must have been preordained from above, because it wasn't my operation." May Marvin Warsh's memory be for blessing. What else are we called upon to remember these first 2 weeks of November? I just returned from Israel with 36 Holy Blossomites. Some are here today, still jet-lagged. I'm impressed you made it for Shabbos. We were 36 of 350 Torontonians on the UJA Centennial Mission, and our trip was timed to coincide with the centennial anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which we must also remember at this time of year. The Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British saying His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. The declaration was contained in a letter dated November 2nd, 1917, from Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild, the leader of the British Jewish community. These words, of course, gave way to what would become the miracle of the modern state of Israel. Remembrance is the key to our redemption. And what else do we remember these early days of November? It has been 79 years since Kristallnacht, the night of November 9th to 10th, 1938. This pogrom was carried out by SA paramilitary forces and German civilians alike. The German authorities looked on and did nothing to intervene. Jewish homes, Jewish hospitals, Jewish schools were ransacked as the attackers demolished buildings. Over 1,000 synagogues were set to fire, 95 in Vienna alone. Over 7,000 Jewish businesses were either destroyed or damaged. At least 91 Jews were murdered that night, and 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and incarcerated in concentration camps. This night of broken glass was the beginning of the end. And this Ner Tamid, this eternal light, just above our Torah scrolls, is a replica of the eternal light. The original was destroyed on Kristallnacht, 1938. It hung in dignity in the Stielerstrasse synagogue of Essen, Germany. A year after World War II came to conclusion, this congregation could barely speak of the losses. We didn't yet know the number 6 million. We didn't have prayers or biographies. We didn't have history books yet. And the survivors could barely tell their stories. So what did we do? We lit a light. Remembrance is the key to redemption. And last of all the many things we must remember these early days of November, it has been 22 years since the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, another war hero, who went on to become Prime Minister and Minister of Defense of Israel. He came closer to making peace with his enemy than anyone ever had before him or since. And you recall that he was gathered there in Tel Aviv at a rally for peace, singing Shir LaShalom, a song of peace. The lyrics on a piece of paper in his breast pocket were splattered with his blood. Peace in Israel still eludes us. And so last Shabbat, when all of Israel was bent in sorrow, remembering Rabin's yahrzeit, we remember that day as a day when peace itself seemed to have died, even the hope for peace. The lyrics of Shir LaShalom describe the impossibility of bringing a dead person back to life, and therefore the song declares, we must pursue peace. Israelis still sing this ballad for peace today, but a little more slowly, a little more quietly, a little less confidently. Remembrance is the key to our redemption. Let me conclude with a poem written by Archibald MacLeish, a World War I veteran, who lost his own brother in that war. The young soldiers do not speak. Nevertheless, they are heard in the still houses. Who has not heard them? They have a silence that speaks for them at night, and when the clock counts, they say, "We are young, we have died, remember us." They say, "We have done what we could, but until it is finished, it is not done." They say, "We have given our lives, but until it is finished, no one can say, no one can know what our lives gave." They say, "Our deaths are not ours, they are yours. They will mean what you make of them." They say, "Whether our lives or our deaths are for peace and a new hope or for nothing at all, we cannot say. It is you who must say this." They say, "We leave you our deaths. Give them their meaning. We were young," they say. "We have died. Remember us." Remembrance is the key to our redemption. God, keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Please rise.